Hello and welcome to On Deadline. I'm Dennis Owens.
I'm Amanda St. Hilaire.
And I'm Kendra Nichols. Thanks for joining us.
If you're listening for the first time, we are journalists for ABC 27 News in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
But on this podcast, we talk about issues that affect people all over.
These are the conversations you don't hear on the news. We're going more in-depth and behind the scenes.
We are different generations with different ideas, and we don't always agree, but we do get very personal, we get very real, and hopefully we get you thinking. We are recording on Monday, November 13th, 2017, and today we're talking about adoption fraud, how often it happens, whether we have enough protections for families trying to adopt. Even if you don't think this issue affects you, there is a big impact on how our society works, and it can hit your family when you least expect it. Then we'll talk about local fire departments that hire sex offenders. An ABC 27 investigation found departments not following their own rules. So what does the law say, and what does this mean for you? Then we'll hear a word from you, your comments and questions from this week. A pregnant woman named Shireen Guernsey was recently arrested and charged with theft by deception. Police say she was working with several different adoption agencies, promising at least 4 families her baby, while all of them paid her thousands of dollars in birth mother expenses. We are here with Beth and Rocky, a couple from Pennsylvania. They say they're one of the families promised that baby, and now they're sharing their experience. Beth, Rocky, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, how are we doing?
And we are also joined by attorney Erin Komada from Scaringi Law. She focuses on family law, including adoption and child custody. Erin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Beth and Rocky, we want to start with you because it's not like you were trying to adopt off of Craigslist or Facebook. You went through all the right channels with a reputable private adoption agency. So what happened?
I think in this case, it was a woman who knew the system, and she had adopted out several children before. I think she had a long history, or I know she had a long history of fraud in her past, and I think she used her past experiences with adoption and knowing the law, and she fooled many people. She fooled several adoption attorneys. She fooled several agencies. And right now, I mean, we know of 4 families, but we also know of another family who she was talking with that dropped out back in August. And there could be countless others. So we're not really sure what happened. We have a pretty good idea how it could be stopped moving forward in the future. But what we do know is there's really no checks and balances in place for these birth mothers. And it puts the adoptive parents in a very tricky situation financially and emotionally.
Mm-hmm. When did you first start to get the idea that something didn't feel right?
I think I had this intuition from the very beginning that something wasn't right, and I could never explain it to anybody because it was just that. It was an intuition that I had. But, you know, she was she was in touch with us a lot in the beginning and texting all the time. And then she kind of stopped responding to texts right away, and we wouldn't hear from her as often as we had in the beginning. So I think that was a big red flag for us. She was always concerned about money. Always kind of reaching out to us to, contact our agency and speed up the process of her getting her money or making it easier for her to get her money. There were just a couple red flags that went up that we thought, well, maybe this isn't right, but she would always find a way to explain it away. You know, she would always find a way to comfort us and say, oh, I'm so happy that I chose you guys and you're going to be great parents. And, you know, I at one point asked her, I said, do you still want us there when the baby's delivered? Because that was our original plan. And I said, if you want us to come down afterwards, I'll understand. And she got offended and was like, I would expect you would want to be there. So the fact that she, was so passionate about it and said, of course I want you in there. Rocky, I'm sorry, I don't want you in there. You can wait in the waiting room.
I can understand
but,
that.
And that's what we said. We were like, no, we totally understand. But she was like, of course I want you there. I want you in there when it's happening. So when you hear somebody say something like that to you,
they're saying the right things.
Right. How do you think that they're lying to you? So she was good.
The hardest thing is, everyone always said, prepare for a roller coaster ride. And that's what we figured is just the ups and downs, the normal flow of an adoption. Unfortunately, I don't think we were naive. It was just one of those things that she just played on every emotion and took advantage of us.
But you went through an adoption agency. So are you
Yes.
able to get your money back, go back to them and say, wait, this was a scam and I should get whatever I paid back?
We have an exceptional case, and I think that is why everybody gave the money back. Typically, the money is not refundable.
And it's not just a little bit of money. I don't think until you've really been through the process, you understand. How much are we talking here?
I would say from start to finish, what most people don't realize, when you factor in agencies, attorneys, your home study fees, getting into a network, the birth mother expenses, you're looking at like $50,000.
Wow.
50,000. Now it can be less, it can be in the 20s and it can go all the way up to the 60s we've seen. But every case is different. Birth mother expenses we think birth mother expenses need to go. I mean, that is opening the door for fraud, and all the different states have different laws regarding birth mother expenses. So we've seen cases from Florida where there's no cap on birth mother expenses. So a woman who's delivering a baby in December and we're seeing her case at the end of October is getting $16,000 in birth mother expenses. What could possibly cost $16,000 when she's on Medicaid? So the baby and the procedure and all the health expenses, those are being covered. But $16,000 is going to the birth mother, but we're not buying a baby. Right? So what is that money going towards then? And I have no problem helping the mother out if she needs help with her rent, if she needs help with gas or going to doctor's appointments and all of those things that might come up. But it seems to me when you start paying birth mothers tens of thousands of dollars and they're giving birth in 2 months, I think the line is definitely being blurred between buying a baby and helping them.
So that's where we want to bring Erin in. And Erin, I saw you nodding a lot when they were describing some of the red flags. When we talk about birth mother expenses and the process of how this works, how does it work? Because a lot of people aren't familiar with the different expenses involved and what goes with what.
Sure. First and foremost, you need to understand that a lot of the scrutiny is on the adoptive parents, not the birth parents. Generally, we are putting the adoptive parents through the ringers. We're going to do a home study, which is more in depth than what it sounds. It's not just a licensed social worker comes to your house, oh, you have a nice home, this is great. It's an extensive background check. You have to produce your Pennsylvania State Police background check, your federal background check, your your child abuse history. For yourself, any adults in your household, they go through your social history, your financial history. We're really vetting these adoptive parents to make sure that this is going to be a safe home to place any child in. Then we do a pre-placement report, which is a report kind of recapping all of this information. We submit this to the court. We do a report of intention to adopt, where you have to say to the court, we're ready, willing, and able. And then in my office, typically I do adoptions where we know who the birth parent is, we know who the adoptive parent is, and it's sort of, we're not pairing anybody. Beth, do you mind talking about your experience with the adoption agency, of how you select your child through the adoption agency?
We were entered into a network where we would receive emails, and the emails would be birth mother cases. So it would give us a decent amount of information, basically saying, how far along they were, the sex of the baby, if they knew, the race, any drug history. So depending on who it was coming from, there might be more or less information. And if you felt comfortable as the adopted parents and in that situation, then you would send your profile book, like a digital profile book in. And then those digital profiles would be shown to the birth mother. And then the birth mother would choose you. So you both had to choose each other to get matched. And then once the match took place, we would have a phone conversation just to make sure that everybody was on board, just to get a good feel. And if the match was a success and everybody wanted to move forward, that's pretty much it.
And then the next part for me would be, okay, so essentially we have one or two known parents. Typically it will be the birth mother who we know and we're aware of. We then have to find who the birth father is. There could be things such as the punitive father, someone who was involved with the mother around the time of conception. We think he's the father, but we haven't established paternity. He would still have to be notified. We'd have to terminate his biological rights, or if we know who the father is, we'd have to terminate his biological rights. Mother, in these cases, typically will consent to the adoption, but she may revoke the consent as well. With termination of
difficulty of the process for adoptive parents.
Exactly. And sure, I mean, I completely understand and I feel for these parents, and especially when you're pregnant and you have an idea of what you want to do, and then when you have that child, we give the parents 72 hours before they can even, the birth mother, 72 hours before she can even sign a consent, and then she has 30 days to revoke that consent. So there is a time period where they can reflect back on that decision. With the birth father, he can sign his consent to the revocation of his rights at any time, but then it becomes irrevocable 30 days after the consent is signed or 30 days after the birth of the child, whichever is later. So
that's got to be a nail biter for those who are waiting. I mean, you're waiting 9 months and then you have to wait another 30 days. The emotional toll that must take, I can't imagine. And then the financial too. I mean, there's a lot in play.
And it sounds like that's why you're so passionate about this. It's not just about money, and it's not just about what happened to you. There's a bigger issue with the system here, because as I understand it, you found out that things weren't exactly on the up and up kind of by accident, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. A nurse at the hospital where she was seeing a doctor for her prenatal care noticed that 2 different attorneys had sent over HIPAA forms for the release of her medical records.
And the birth mother was in what state?
Alabama.
She's in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Alabama. So
And you're in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. So we had an attorney in Alabama because we needed someone down there to help with the her revocation of rights and all of those things. And he just happened to be friends with one of the attorneys that the nurse from the hospital got in touch with and said, there's 2 of you asking for this woman's medical records. She happened to call our attorney just because they were friends, just to, oh my gosh, can you believe this is happening? And he asked what her name was and immediately just said, oh my gosh, I'm working with those people too. So that's how we found out. And had they not been friends, or had he not taken her call, or we might not know any of this.
So Erin, being the adoption expert in the room, how does something like that happen? Are agencies required to communicate with each other? How do you not know that a woman is working with several different families?
So the Department of Public Welfare, now Department of Human Services, regulates adoption agencies. So adoption agencies have to communicate with the department, but not necessarily with each other. And unfortunately, I could see this situation happening a lot. I don't know what the answer is, whether to have a registry. And I was even saying to you, Amanda, the other day when we were speaking, even as attorneys, do we create a list of birth mothers that we're working with and go off of this registry? That would require us to opt in. That would require waivers of confidentiality. I mean, it's a big mess. The information that adoption agencies have to get is more demographic than anything. Religion, race, age of the parents, those types of things. Medical history, they should get that information, but they don't necessarily have to vet these people. And if you haven't already watched the video with Beth and Rocky, I definitely suggest you go on the website and watch the video, because I found it very compelling, and I also think it highlights just how important this is and how little information you get. But the big thing I would say is, Beth had mentioned it here and she mentioned it in the video, trust your gut. If you start to get a bad feeling, if you start to have questions, talk to your attorney, talk to the agency, find somebody who can investigate a little bit further, do your own investigation. Social media is a wealth of information. So unfortunately, we don't get all the information we want, but there are ways to get that information, or at least try to get that information, so you feel better about the situation.
And part of the difficulty is because this birth mother had a list of priors that involved different levels of theft or fraud. And so you might wonder, this agency should background check her, but at the same time, if a birth mother has a criminal history, does that mean her baby is less worthy of adoption? A lot of times you are dealing with, not all the time, but a lot of times you are dealing with checkered pasts, and how do you balance that?
We knew that she had been to prison. That was disclosed to us from the very beginning. And when we spoke with her in our first phone call, she talked about that. She didn't get into great detail about why she was in prison, but she talked about how she never wanted to go back, how it was a horrible experience. She learned her lesson. She made a mistake, a terrible mistake. And that was part of the reason that she wanted to give this child up for adoption, because she did not have a good life. She did not have a good childhood, and she wanted this kid to have opportunities that she would never be able to provide for him. And she saw us as being able to provide everything she ever wanted for herself. So that's emotionally where she got us. You know, she looked at our profile book and saw that we like to travel, and saw that we have 2 daughters, older daughters, and 3 dogs, and all of these things. And she looked at our life and just said, I want that for my child. I want everything you guys have for my child. And, you know, one thing that did bother me when all of this came to light, we found out through a reporter in Mobile that Kevin, the father, had a very, very long criminal past. We were never made aware of his past. And I think a lot of times the father in the situation is sort of dismissed. Oh, he'll give up his rights. He'll sign a waiver. This is what we know about him. He's brown hair, brown eyes, 6'2", 200 pounds. And that's it. They don't really dig into the father's past. It's more just concentrated on the mother. And had we known that they both had such lengthy criminal pass, I think I would have said, you know what, we're going to pass on this one, because it became more like a Bonnie and Clyde situation. You know, I looked at her as, oh, she made some mistakes. She's really sorry about it, and she wants to move on with her life. And she's with this guy, and he seems good and decent, and maybe she'll turn her life around. Had I known, no, she's with a guy who has an equally checkered past as she does, I might have thought, these two are up to no good together. So
yeah, and plus the other thing we fell into is she placed 3 other children for adoption. So we're like, okay, she's been down this road. Why would she change on the 4th one? Who's to say on the other prior adoptions that she didn't run the same scam? Just because in our case we found out, she could have very easily just said right before the baby was delivered, said no to one family, no to the other, and they would have moved on and digested the situation and, you know, start their process over, because you can't really hold her any accountability for saying, I want my child. So who's to say that didn't happen in prior?
You're saying if it wasn't found out, she could have just said, oh, I'm sorry, I changed.
Yeah, she could have
been getting money from 3 or 4 different people, said, oh, I'm sorry to 3 of them, I've changed my mind, and then give the baby to one of them.
Or keep the baby.
it from
Yeah, walk
herself.
away with
Yeah.
$50,000, you know, scammed 4 families for, you know, 6 months, 7 months.
and there would have been no way to know that.
Right.
You know, it would have just been her calling our attorney or calling us or sending us a text and saying, I've changed my mind, I want to keep the baby. And
Yeah.
that is where it ends.
That's
it
where
ends there, and there is no arguing. And we always said if she changed her mind, we would never fight
Yeah,
that.
we would support that
We would
100%.
support that because she was
That's
the
her right.
rightful birth parent.
Yes. Yeah.
But I always said, but if she's scamming us and I find out
Right.
that she never had intentions of giving up the baby, then I'm gonna.
Yeah, that's where the issue is. We were fine with a mother deciding to keep her child, but this is way above those means.
So she's back in prison, the place she never wanted to go again.
Right.
Exactly.
And the baby hasn't been born yet.
Right.
Exactly.
As far as we know,
Where will the baby go?
There's a very, very good chance a baby will go to foster care. Unfortunately, from what we were told by our attorney, the likelihood of any of us getting the child is slim to none. They will, I guess, I don't know if the law is the same here in Pennsylvania, but they will try to place the baby with someone in her family as long as they can prove that they're able to care for the baby. And if no one in her family can take the baby, then it'll be placed in foster.
So you have a baby who is very much wanted
Exactly.
by
many
several
families.
families
Yeah.
and could very likely go into the system. Erin, how common is that?
This is something that actually Pennsylvania law is quite similar. So since she is not willingly going to go along with an adoption, this mother has the right to raise her child. But since she will be in prison, this child's going to be a dependent child. So what this means is this mother is not capable of raising this child because she's in prison. So we need to find a placement. In Pennsylvania, it's the same thing. Kinship placement gets first priority. They want to keep the child with family members if possible because we have concurrent goals in dependency. Adoption as the final goal if the mother can't get her act together, or reunification. If the mom gets released from prison, she may be able to get this child back and raise this child. But if not, then we're back in adoption. But none of the parents who paid for some of these expenses are going to be in the running.
Why? Well, but you said something. If she doesn't want to give it up for adoption, we don't know that she doesn't want to give it up for adoption. What if she wants to give it up for adoption, despite all the things that have gone on?
At this point, I mean, it may be tough. She may not have much of a decision if children and youth are involved at this point. So now we have judicial discretion and more people making decisions on behalf of her versus the private route of, okay, I'm going to work with this adoption agency. You seem like a good family. I'm not able to take care of my child. Let's work together so you can adopt my child later on. Now we have a lot more people scrutinizing and making decisions on behalf of this woman, even if she consents to the adoption. And again, it may be a kinship resource. She doesn't have a kinship resource. And let's not forget the father, because the father's family will also be considered as kinship resources. So, I mean, it's very... it's devastating. It's devastating, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through this.
Oh, thank you.
What's next, Beth and Rocky? What's next for you guys? Have you given up on this now because of this whole situation, or where are you at?
We've had a long journey the last year and a half. We did the IVF. We had failures in that regard, so we decided to do the adoption. Where we're at right now is when that next profile comes through and it catches our heart, that's what we're going to go for. But until that day comes, we're just sitting at bay, just waiting for that email to come and get matched with another birth mother.
I think too, for me, and I know Rocky and I have talked about this extensively, and I don't know how we go about doing this, but we cannot let this just have happened without something changing. Like this happened to us, and I have to see it that it happened for a reason. And so that reason, I think, has to be changing the way that adoption is done in this country, whether that is helping to create some sort of national registry or taking the birth mother expenses to a more reasonable place, or I don't know, working with agencies to do some sort of insurance program that if the adoption does not go through, you're not out tens of thousands of dollars. Had our adoption agency not given us back our money, we would not be having this conversation about adopting or going down the adoption path again, because we just don't have the money to do that. You know, financially, you can only take so much, and then you have to say enough is enough. So, you know, I hope that we can, you know, make lemonade out of the lemons
Beth, Rocky,
that
we
were
hear
given.
your story, and I think the natural inclination is to ask, what can we do to fix some of these problems? So, Erin, how much of this is complicated by the fact that you have individual states with their individual laws, but a lot of adoptions go across state lines?
Well, we do have interstate compacts where we're to communicate with the other state, either the state receiving the child or the state sending the child. So we do have oversight. But unfortunately, I do think that a cost is a lot of it. I wonder if a solution is, yes, you pay the cost. I know that the costs are necessary right then and there, but if we could escrow the costs. So, okay.
And when you say escrow, you mean?
Delay the payment, delay the receipt to the birth mother so that there's not that much of an incentive to, hey, I can make a quick buck here. But I just don't know. I do think shedding light on the issue is very important. And if I may share a case that I had earlier this year, it was a surrogacy case. My client contracted with a woman to carry a child, and we had the surrogacy contract. It was very, very detailed. She gave birth to the child. My client took the child back to his home state of Kansas. The gestational carrier / egg donor filed in Pennsylvania a custody action. So she was claiming that she had custody rights in Pennsylvania. She technically does, because she was the birth mother. We used her egg. So it was this huge battle to try and fight this. And one of the key points we were trying to make to the judges, if you allow this, you're allowing the ultimate scam, because this woman can now collect child support in addition to the tens of thousands of dollars she's already collected. And believe me, it was anything she could get extra money for. A C-section. Oh yeah, I had a C-section. Okay. She was claiming that she couldn't have children afterwards. We don't know whether or not that's true, because unfortunately, the child was injured when he was in the mother's house. So devastating story. But, again, there are so many scams. There are so many schemes these people can come up with. And, yeah, I think that there has to be oversight, but I think there also has to be recognition of the problem. One of the big things that helped my client was reaching out to the community, because there is a huge online community of parents who go through the adoption process or surrogacy agreements. And as soon as he started asking questions, he posted, "Hey, does anybody know this woman?" Within 30 minutes, he got a wealth of information of she scammed us, she scammed us, she scammed us. So it was wonderful. So do your homework at the very beginning. Use the resources you have available to you, because that's what we have in place right now. What the future holds, I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, whatever we can to just shed light on this problem and try and come up with solutions.
How does Pennsylvania compare to other states?
Well, I can tell you from the surrogacy standpoint, it's interesting. We have some court decisions saying surrogacy contracts will be upheld. So compared to New Jersey, which says they're void for public policy, that's good. But it's not as strong as California, which has the Uniform Parentage Act, which says we're going to hold you to it. So in this case, even though we had a surrogacy agreement, we were found that we could be in custody court because this person, this mother, was technically related to the child because we used her egg. So one thing I want to point out, please, please, please heed my advice. If you're going to do a surrogacy in Pennsylvania, do an unknown donor for genetic material. Please do that so that we don't have the issue. Use a separate gestational carrier and a separate egg donor so that, we can make it as clean as possible. If you're even thinking about it, just please listen to this case, use it as the example. In terms of, to go back to the release of information and information about birth parents, only Oklahoma and Texas really require the dissemination of criminal background. So the criminal background information, in Texas it relates to drug charges or anything related, violence against the family. Same thing in Oklahoma, violence against the family. So we're really, unfortunately, not getting all the information, but at the same time there's the question of would it make a difference, because generally these parents do have checkered pasts, do have substantial issues, and we're more looking to the future in adoption, at least how the laws are right now, of, okay, what's the child's medical history so I can know if this happens, what psychiatric problems did the parents have, so if I start to see signs of this, I can mention it to future doctors. So that's where we're at right now.
Tell me about, you alluded to a problem with a national registry. It seems to me almost common sense, but the lawyer will always tell us why it's not common sense. That if a woman,
we have you on here.
if a woman contracts, says, yes, I'm pregnant, I want to give my child up for an adoption, goes to an adoption agency, why is there not like some kind of a check put on that or a hold put on that that everybody would know? And without getting into all her specifics or whatever, but just to make sure one person isn't shopping her baby around 5 times. Yep.
So I think it's a great idea. I see the issues we would need to cover. Confidentiality first and foremost. We would have to have some sort of opt-in where everyone using that registry can't disclose any of the information. Plus, yes, we've moved toward open adoptions, which is, you're having communication between the adoptive parents and the birth parents, but some people still don't want that. Some people still don't want to be recognized. Now, for us as practitioners getting that information, I don't see the issue of me getting that information and not disclosing it to my client if I'm bound by those rules. But if we're dealing with an adoption agency, I would assume that every employee is going to be bound by those rules. I would hope that everybody would have to follow that. But at the same time, I could see the huge issue of releasing that information if someone doesn't want that information to be released.
What about if it was just their name and social security number? Not that anybody could see the social security number, but if you were to go to an adoption agency and they typed in your name and social security number, you just popped up as you're already matched, you're already working with another agency.
Your baby is already spoken
for.
For.
The baby is already spoken for. They've been accepting money. We don't have to give everybody your life story. We don't have to give them any medical records, your address, or anything like that, but just a flag to say, nope, this person already matched. And then that agency can talk with them and say, why does this say you're matched already? Or that attorney can say, I'm sorry, I can't work with you. You've already been matched. And do you know the adoption law? Do you know that it's, a felony if you try to scam somebody out of money. I mean, I just feel like that would just be a safety net. Maybe it's not perfect, but...
And I would think not only for the adoptive parents to protection, but the agencies and the lawyers that are involved would want that credibility too, that, okay, this is one thing that cannot happen is a scam, because we now have checks and balances that protect the birth mothers, the agencies, and the lawyers. Because right now, perfect example is Shay did what she did because the system's in play and it allows it. And unfortunately, we're,
a victim of it.
A victim of it, exactly. So.
And I'm sure as you share your story and talk about the things that you'd like to see change, hindsight's 2020. So is there anything that you want people to walk away from after hearing what you have to say, kind of like a word to the wise, or even just the emotional aspect of all of this? Because I don't think you can understand it unless you've been through it.
No, I mean, we talked with one of the other families that was a part of this a few weeks ago, and talking with them, it was therapeutic, but at the same time, it was also devastating for all of us because this other couple had actually flown down to Alabama to be there for her gender ultrasound. And the same exact day, she's texting me all day long. She's sitting there with this other adoptive mother holding her hand during her ultrasound as she's telling this family, it's a boy, you're going to have a boy, and then texting Rocky and I, congratulations, guys, it's a boy. Aren't you so excited? And when you hear this, even that day, I said to her, oh, she just texted me. You had come to the house and you had just left. And I grabbed my phone and she had just texted me and said how Kevin was really looking forward to getting to know us better. He wanted to get better acquainted with us and that she was sick and this and that. And she's sending the same stuff, not the part about getting acquainted because this family had met them and spent time with them, spent a weekend with them. But just sending the same thing. I'm sick. I'm not feeling well. So just... It is so emotional. I think people find it hard to understand because I'm not pregnant. I'm not feeling the baby inside of me. We didn't create this baby, but we had ultrasound pictures and we bonded with this woman. I looked at her as a friend. I looked at her as my angel, my savior. She was giving me something I couldn't do for myself. And I was forever, forever grateful to her. I didn't even know how to repay her. So there, you get excited for it. We, started to work on the nursery because she was due in a couple months and my parents were having a baby shower for us and all the invitations were sent and we had to text everybody and cancel that. And, you think in 2 months time, we're going to have this baby and everything's going to be wonderful and great. And then you find out that, we're not stupid people. We're really smart people and we're street smart and we don't fall for scams and, people taking advantage of us. And somehow, because we were just so vulnerable and wanting something so badly, we were the perfect victims for it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the system and how we approached it and went through it, we did everything that we were supposed to. Unfortunately, with the way it's set up, and we keep coming back to it, without a registry and intake and other agencies knowing what's going on, it's allowed to happen, and unfortunately we're victims. But like what Beth said too is since August when we found out, we took this as an approach that yes, we're adopting a baby, but we're going to live it like we're having a baby. And that was probably the toughest thing is because you get on social media, you tell your friends, just like, hey, we're having a baby boy from Alabama, and we want to share it and tell the story and enjoy just as if she was having the baby herself. Everything but that was in place. That was the only difference. And now we just rebuild and move forward.
And I think, like Erin said, and I said earlier too, just trust your gut. Just trust your gut. And if something feels off, it's probably because it is, and do dig as much as you can. Well, I didn't find enough, I didn't uncover this scam, but I was on the computer all the time, typing her name in, doing as many searches, finding her on Facebook, going through her history on Facebook, and just trying to get to know her better and try to know who I was really working with. Yeah. And I think that is what threw up a lot of red flags, was the research that I was doing. And I would also say get an attorney involved as early as possible. We got our attorney in Alabama a few weeks before this happened, and had we not gotten him involved earlier or sooner than later, as we did, we would still be in the dark about this.
Yeah, and
we would
even though
totally
we
be
had
in the
red
dark.
flags that go up, the financial repercussion that we were already in play with.
You're already invested.
It's almost like playing a hand of poker and waiting to see the flop and the river come, because at the end of the day, you're so far in, to walk away and start over would be financial catastrophe. Whereas we're this far down the road, just to go a little bit farther to pay to see it,
Right.
for lack of a better phrase, that's what we fell to. So it's like, even though you have all that, not resentment, but thoughts, and what could go wrong, it's like, well, the repercussions of going backwards is financially greater.
Yeah, because when these red flags were going up, we couldn't pull out. We couldn't say, okay, we don't want to do this. The money's gone. We would have lost the money. And when you're talking tens of thousands of dollars, at that point, you're like Rocky said, it became a poker game. It was like, well, I guess we're going to have to just keep going.
So that's
but
another
every
way
day is
adoptive
just
parents are
another
unprotected.
emotional.
Oh yeah, it's 100%. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's nothing in play to change it right now. So like Beth said, if there's anything of good that comes of it, is let our story be told and let it come to the front line and have a conversation. And how do we move it to change it to protect us, the adoption agencies, the lawyers, just so it's not the Wild West, as that one guy said.
Well, and on that note, Erin, as the adoption attorney, any final thoughts going off that on how we move forward and what can be changed?
Well, first of all, I just like to kind of recap. You've heard it firsthand, the emotional devastation. Keep in mind, typically, people who are adopting have already experienced the emotional devastation of infertility as well. So for somebody to scam adoptive parents, it's really, make your own judgments. But I think there's also something very noble for somebody who wants to give their child up for adoption, recognizing they can't provide for them. So in the best case scenario, when this actually works, it's the best situation for everybody involved. So I hope, even if this is not your own situation, you're hearing what everyone's saying today and you do want to get involved, because this is a wonderful thing we can do for multiple families when it works correctly. In terms of eliminating the fraud, we can do better. We can certainly do better. I think a registry would be an excellent idea. We would just have to kind of navigate some issues. I do see a little bit of, it may deter some birth mothers. It may, because maybe they don't want to give that information. But I think the few that we lose for the better protection, I think it's a worthwhile gain. But that's something that, we would have to leave up to the legislature. But I think at least we're getting the ball rolling. In terms of protecting yourself, absolutely, given what we have right now, look into the birth parents. Do what you can, ask questions, use forums, use the online community, ask people, have you worked with this person before? Does anybody know this person's name? If you don't get a response, that's generally a good thing. Trust your gut, use your attorney, absolutely. I have no problem being the bad guy. If my client comes to me and says, you know what, I'm a little concerned about this criminal history, but I don't want to taint the relationship I have with the birth mother, I'll be the one. I'll say, hey, listen, my client doesn't really care, but I do, so I can be the bad guy and get more information. That's what we're here for. So I would say these are the starting points, but certainly we can do better.
Erin Komada, adoption attorney for Scaringi Law, thank you so much. And thank you, Beth and Rocky, for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sex offender firefighters. Kendra, that is a story that you've been working on for a long time. You hear that phrase, and people tend to have a bit of a reaction. So tell us a little bit about this story that we had air this past week. It's already getting a lot of response.
Yeah, we've had a lot of varied response to it too, which was interesting. So we got several tips from viewers who were concerned about registered sex offenders who were volunteering at their local fire departments. So we started looking into it. Yes, indeed, we found some registered sex offenders at 2 local fire departments. One of them did not have any procedures in place. However, the application for the membership did ask if you ever had a criminal offense or a felony. At the other fire department, they already had procedures in place and policies that said if you have ever been convicted, you cannot be a member. They also required all of their members to have background checks. So we found out that there was a registered sex offender at High Spire, that Borough and the fire department were aware of his Megan's Law status. So we asked Borough Council why they weren't following their own rules and procedures, which clearly stated if you are a registered or if you have ever been convicted of a sexual offense, you cannot be a member. Their response to us is that this particular member was this particular firefighter was a member of the fire department before those rules were put into place, which I then asked, so he's grandfathered in as a sexual offender. So it was interesting seeing the reaction. We had some viewers who were like, go ABC 27, thank you for looking into this matter, bringing it to light. And then we got a lot of emails about other departments that have registered sex offenders. Then we had some people saying, let these people alone. They've served their time. Why does it matter if they can put out the fire? Why does it matter if they're a registered sex offender? So it was very interesting.
To me, what struck me most about the story is that under these current rules, under Pennsylvania law, a fire department could have two people with the same exact offense, the same exact sex offender status, but one that was hired a year prior to this law going into effect can stay, doesn't need to be re-background checked, and one who's hired after that can't be a firefighter.
And I would argue that they put these procedures and rules in place for a reason, for the integrity of the department, for the protection of the people. So, yes, it's kind of a contradiction.
But the bottom line is then there's really no law then. It's just each fire department's set of rules?
It is up to each municipality to come up with their own rules and procedures. Under current Pennsylvania law, if there is a junior firefighting program at the department,
Which I know High Spire has.
The person, when we talked to the state, they said the person running that junior firefighting program must have background checks, must have a child abuse clearance. We also spoke to an attorney who said they read the law as all firefighters, that if there's a fire department that has a junior firefighting program, all the firefighters in that department must have a child abuse clearance. Here's the thing, Dennis.
Interpretations.
There's no enforcement law. There's no enforcement arm making sure
teeth
this
to
is.
it.
Nobody's making sure this is happening.
And the other thing is, just as a community member, because you showed me that on the Megan's Law website, these people were putting the fire department's address. Now, if I'm just a member of that community, I don't want my community's fire department's address being on the Megan's Law website.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting. I think for me, just on a personal note, I think the frustration with this story was, why put rules and procedures in place if you're not going to follow them? That was the crux of it for me.
Right.
This story wasn't about Megan's Law and if it's constitutional or not, and that's not what we're getting into here. What we're talking about is, here's a municipality that says, here's the rules we're going to follow sometimes. I mean, that's basically how I take it.
Right.
We're going to put these rules and procedures in place. They passed them for a reason. And then they really don't follow them. I think it's sending a mixed message. I think, and talking to an attorney, they're potentially setting themselves up for lawsuits in the future.
That was my next question, was the liability of these departments. They do get taxpayer money, and that money may have to be paid out in lawsuits if you're taking on that liability.
Yes.
Having said that, there were a number, at least just opening our minds to the other side.
Yes.
Is there some unfairness on exactly who is on the Megan's Law website? And do we as a society immediately assume everybody that's on there is the worst kind of child molester, when in fact there might be degrees of different violation?
And they do have different degrees. There's tier 1, 2, 3, and they have that in place. And I do think there's a story there. I do think that can be a legitimate concern, question
I'm thinking
to pose.
follow-up.
And we do have a follow-up coming.
I have a couple follow-ups
We do have a
planned,
follow-up
I
coming.
think.
I will say, just for clarification, the two people that we were looking into had sexual offenses against children. It wasn't a 18-year-old boyfriend who, we're not talking about that kind of case here. These were offenses against children. And I guess the only other thing I want to address here is, some people were like, how dare you affect these people's livelihood? These were volunteer positions. They were not getting paid to be in these positions. We're not affecting any income into their family. There are rules in place that weren't being followed. Now, if these people were to get fired from their jobs for not reporting their Megan's Law status, that's a failure on their part. But again, I think there is a story here. There is an issue here. I think at home you should be checking with your local fire department to see if they have a procedure in place. And if they don't, talk to them about it. That's your right as a citizen to
Go to
see what they're
public
doing.
meetings.
Sure. Yep.
All right. Thanks, Kendra.
She never misses a chance to plug going. To
It's important, Dennis.
I agree.
It's where the good stuff happens. Now it's time for a word from you. The comments and questions you sent us this week. We got a big response to our last episode about juvenile lifers, people who were sentenced to prison for the rest of their lives for offenses committed when they were minors. Maggie wrote in saying, I would like to see how many of these juveniles were given crappy representation or stiffer penalties compared to other criminals convicted of the same crime. I don't think that even half of these kids deserve life. District attorneys just find easy targets to make their career look better. If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. If you commit adult crimes, you get adult sentences. Well, these are 14 to 17-year-olds. There are very few circumstances in which a juvenile should be given life. And of course, we had some people who very much disagreed with that. Joe said, violence is violence. Once you hit the double digits, there is no excuse for physically hurting, maiming, or killing another individual. If they are definitely guilty, treat them the same as you would an adult. And just to show you how comments kind of devolve on social media, we then had Kevin jump in and said, I wish you do the crime, you do the time applied to Hillary. So
you always have one.
Always got to bring politics
an
into
opportunity
it.
to bring that. I want to respond to the first person because
Please
I do
do.
think there's a valid thought of what I call comparative justice. And by that I mean I'd like to there's a story to be done about looking at the crime a person commits in one county versus the crime a person might commit in another county. Same exact crime, but sometimes you'll see vastly different
very
sentences
subjective.
based on who their lawyer is, based on what kind of money they have, often. And it is an odd, like we've done the story on Tina Brocious here in the area who killed her baby. She was 18, and she may have had some emotional issues, whatever. She's been behind bars for over 30 years, and she was poor, I believe, is the story. But there was a couple at Gettysburg College that did almost the same thing, and they were more well heeled, and they got 2.5 years. So I mean, it was the same crime. And somebody's getting life and somebody's getting 2.5. There's an unfairness there. And I think there's a valid story to be done about what I call comparative justice and how it's not fair to some people. Maybe the one's too lenient, and I think probably most people would agree, but sometimes the other one's too severe for the exact same thing.
If you'd like to check out the links to the stories, articles, and videos we discussed, you can find them in our show notes on our website, abc27.com. Send us voice memos with your thoughts. Record on your phone and email theinvestigators@abc27.com. To get On Deadline delivered directly to your phone, tablet, or computer each week, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. Please take a few minutes and leave us a review in Apple Podcasts. It helps us reach other people, and we do read them. Your thoughts help us figure out what we're doing well and what we can improve. Thank you, Eric Semmel, for producing this podcast, and Jason Dietz for composing and recording the music. It's time for us to go. We're on deadline.